Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to expand on a word I used in another video, and that word is cartoonify. I'm going to explain more what I mean by it and why I think it's so fundamental to how we encounter the world and other people, and why I think when we're conscious of it, we can make the world a better place and have a richer experience. This video is mostly designed to just be listened to, so if you're driving in a car or walking, you can just take it in that way. I am going to occasionally put up some short poems and haikus and quotes of mine that are found in some of my books, and perhaps some quotes from others, but they won't be necessary to taking in this video, just extra. I made up this word, as far as I know, cartoonify, I think first in an essay and recently in a video I did about science and reality. And I think it deserves its own video because it's a fundamental thing we do, people do, everybody does, when we think about and talk about reality. To cartoonify something is to make it simplistic. And we do it, or tend to do it, 99.999% of us. So not everyone. We do it when we're talking about things we don't know much or anything about. So I used the word cartoonify when I was talking about a scientist I was watching in a video. Just mention offhand or a few times about the sort of, whatever you want to call it, the supernatural, the paranormal, the miraculous, how these things haven't been proven, are not real. Let's just move on. The scientist was Steven Pinker, and I don't mean to single him out. I think from what I can tell, he's very well-meaning and very intelligent. So this is not any sort of attack, and it's not singling out any particular person. It just came up when I was watching this. And I guess partly I do want to use him because he's a professor at MIT. And so it's these types of positions that we tend, some of us, to kind of go glassy-eyed and just accept what they say. So I do want to sort of go back on what I just said. It is important that the person making these pronouncements is an intelligent, published, well-regarded professor at an esteemed university. And he's a cognitive scientist. We wouldn't go to Steven Pinker and say, tell us about history. Tell us about the history of England. All right, we wouldn't go to anyone in a certain discipline and ask them to tell us something informed about another discipline. And we lose sight of this with things like the miraculous and the supernatural, because we are easily led to believe in our culture that they are in fact completely ridiculous and never actually happen. But Steven Pinker, I am willing to bet, and most scientists, have not deeply explored the topic. They haven't read the numerous books, testimony, in-depth experience, often in groups, of people who have had these encounters, the spiritual literature, the experiences of people in India over the millennia with masters, different tribal cultures and how they view and actually perceive reality, any number of anecdotes from people I've met, and probably a lot of you, who have very compelling stories about maybe a premonitory dream, etc. Scientists like Pinker simply haven't explored these areas in depth. And I pointed out that they are not qualified to talk about them, just as someone else would not be qualified to talk about Pinker's field. I mean, unless, of course, we've delved deeply into it. But this phenomenon is not limited to scientists and the supernatural. Everybody does it all the time. Another example I used I think in the same video was in the West, we tend to cartoonify something like Islam. We think of it as this one simplistic thing instead of a incredibly complex mixture of different beliefs and takes on the Quran and emphasizing certain things and different schools of thought and different personalities and teachers. And I can't speak in too much depth about all that because I am not an expert on Islam, although I've read a couple books. We do it with any number of things. Take any subject, take George Washington. We have a cartoon version of George Washington, and maybe we'll pontificate on that in a conversation, or I don't know how many people are pontificating about George Washington. But the reason I bring up George Washington is this idea really hit me actually when I read, I think it was called 1776, and I think the author was David McCullough, a book about George Washington. And it was about just the incredibly complex personalities and scenarios and situations that were going on at the time. And it just happened to hit me in particular with that book, this general truth, which is that if you take anything and explore it in depth, it becomes incredibly complex and nuanced, and it becomes very hard to say anything in general. Take any subject, ants, dandelions, Rasputin, the siege of Stalingrad, or any person, that person on the subway you saw, or any form of life. If you do a deep dive into any of these things, you'll find a universe, an incredibly complex universe. William Blake said, "To generalize is to be an idiot." And this is what I believe he was talking about. And we all love to do it. Oh, yeah, such and such, that's just bullshit, or that's nonsense, or this, that, the other. It's a staple of conversations, and it is, for the most part, meaningless, right? Which means a lot of our conversations and discourse is just people yapping away about abstractions and making pat generalizations and sweeping dismissals, etc. I think it was Louis Menand writes in the New Yorker. I remember something he said in one of his articles, which was, when you connect the dots, every dot is made of more dots. And that's a similar idea. So if people really took to heart what I'm saying, I think there'd be a lot less talking. And maybe a lot more listening and a lot more exploring. This is something we need to do more of. I recently watched a video that I'll try to link. It was a man talking about cults, and he was saying and wrote a book about how some Trump followers, the Trump phenomenon, has cult-like aspects. He actually was in a cult himself, so he has some in-depth experience. And he said, if you're talking to someone who's in a cult and you're concerned about them, maybe they're a friend or relative, it's not helpful to attack them or call them crazy. It's not helpful to come at them with an arrogant approach. He said what's helpful is to ask them questions. When did you first encounter this person? What were your thoughts? What attracted you to this person, this group? How has it changed your life? Respond to how they respond to your questions. That is a way to de-cartoonify a situation. I think just at the kind of everyday level, this is a helpful concept. And sometimes I like to take things all the way And if we take this idea of cartoonifying all the way, it's actually true that every idea and concept and word is a cartoonifying, or we could call it an abstraction. Because if you sink into your experience in the moment, if you sense what you're feeling inside, I'm feeling sort of a buzzing in my body right now because I'm relaxing it, and you just take in your senses, the sounds, the light, directly, without the filter of a thought about them. That's really the only true non-cartoonifying encounter with reality, our immediate experience. So we could say that all thought and all concepts, because they're abstractions, are cartoonifying reality. And of course, we're not going to stop having thoughts and concepts. It's part of being human. But it's good to have perspective. It's good to watch how we use them. Abstractions and ideas are like tools. They can cause harm, right? If I abstract a Muslim as someone who's antagonistic to my way of life, that's harmful. If I see men as being a certain way, that's harmful. We really have to watch this tendency to put people in groups. And in some ways, we're doing it more than ever. You're in a trans group, you're in a straight group, you're in a black group or a white group or a Democratic group or a Republican group. This is all cartoonifying. And I would say it's mostly unhelpful. Because most fundamentally, we're all human beings. And really, to put us in some group and claim that we're like everybody in that group is to begin stripping away that humanity. I hope this video can be a reminder or encouragement to be more curious, ask more questions, realize just how beyond measure this world we're in is so rich and complex. And to also remember that judgments almost always cloud our vision. You can't really judge and see something clearly at the same time. And part of seeing clearly is asking questions, because isn't that how we clarify and see more? So here it is the next day after I made the first part of this video, and I had this realization that I have cartoonified myself. I've had images of what I'm supposed to say or do or act like. And I've tried to squeeze myself into those images and constraints. Cartoonifying helps. It gives us guidelines, even if they're illusory. Today I have a completely free day ahead of me. I don't have any obligations. And I wrote this little poem. It's hard to live in a de-cartoonified world. It's hard on the ego. It's hard on me, at least. It's hard to face an empty day. It's hard to let it all be easy. It's hard to have permission. And I've also been watching a lot of videos about how things are made, sort of this complicated background to our lives. And I found this video about how toilet paper is made. So here's this incredibly common, mundane thing we all use every day. Oh yeah, toilet paper. And it's unbelievable how complex the process is for making toilet paper. So I'm going to link that video here. And I do that just because it's an example of the utterly complex background to our lives. And then I found this video about the Hoover Dam, about the construction of the Hoover Dam, which gives power, water power. And it was just unbelievable how much goes into these projects just so that I can flip a light switch and have light. So this incredibly simple, everyday, mundane act has this monumentally complex and ingenious process behind it. I don't know that I get power directly from the Hoover Dam, but it's just an example where, just to clear the space where they're going to build the dam, they had to first build tunnels through the rocks on either side to divert the water away from the area before the dam could even be constructed. And just the construction of the tunnels itself is ingenious. I think the best example, the most dramatic example of what I'm talking about is our own bodies. So when I was in college, I eventually settled on a biology major. I had started out wanting to be an engineer, or thinking I wanted to be an engineer. And then I went through various changes, but I remember I took a neurobiology class and we were studying how a single nerve impulse travels through our nerves. I want to move my finger, let's say. The complex dance of tiny channels opening in our nerve cells to allow little ions to come through, and then they close in this precisely orchestrated manner so that different kinds of ions can come through, and then they can flow out, and then these are pumped, and this is just a single neuronal impulse is so complex. I had considered the existence of God, but in that moment I remember thinking there is no way this just came about by chance, by blind evolution. Now, I'm not a creationist, some cartoon version of how things were created, but I do think there is something beyond just blind mutation, evolution. I think there is a consciousness in the universe. But anyway, I digress as usual.